You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is the second of a series of bonus episodes we are doing in celebration of our 10th year anniversary being on the air, a show that we're calling From a Certain Point of View. We are bringing on some of our most beloved guests, beloved supporters, people that we've had the opportunity to meet in person, and just overall really good Star Wars people that have a lot of great things in their head and a lot of speculation in their head. And we thought it'd be a great way to kind of put them in the spotlight, since they were the ones that kind of got us through the last 10 years. So we've already done one show. Again, this is the second one. We've got a number of them still lined up. So sit back, enjoy. And we're going to talk about Force Visions and Prophecies. And before we get to our guests, I'm going to bring on somebody we all know and love. He was just here last night, too. It seems like I haven't seen you in forever. But hey, Jonesy, how are you doing?
Let's do this every night of the week. Let's give Mike something to edit every single night.
Oh, that would kill him. I don't even think he knows. He probably knows that we're doing the show because of the edit he did. But he's probably thinking, oh, this guy didn't tell me we're doing another one this week. So
that's right.
Thanks, Mike.
Marathon week.
Marathon week, right. It's like Shark Week, only less bite. How about that?
Right. Yeah, this is going to be super exciting. Go ahead and introduce our guest. Man, so give him a chance to talk.
Yep. Your eyes aren't deceiving you. This is the infamous Utini from Discord, aka Dante DeMille. Utini, how are you doing, man? We haven't actually physically seen you in like 2 years. Back at Celebration, we all sat in the stadium. And what was it? What was it that was that the trailer?
Yeah, it was a trailer.
The trailer for Rise of Skywalker, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so it's been a while, man. How are you doing?
Yeah, that was awesome. Oh yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Yeah,
good.
I get to see you guys every week. This is the first time you guys get to see me, so hopefully that turns out okay.
Hopefully, it turns out all right.
Yeah, and I've got about 3 hours of notes, so hopefully Mike won't mind.
All right, well, sit back, guys, because we've got quite a bit to get through. No, that we're gonna wrap this up in about 15 minutes. No, it'll be however long it needs to be. So
I've got one good line. That's all I
can. Thanks to everybody that's joined us live tonight on the YouTube, Facebook, Look at me, I sound like the old guy. On YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. And if you guys want to join us on all these future episodes, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Facebook page, Twitch, and check out our social media, all that stuff. Jonesy will probably plug all this at the very end. He does a much better job than I do. But let's jump into this. So, as part of this episode or this series of episodes, we're going out to these folks and saying, look, what do you want to talk about, right? Anything and everything that's related to Star Wars is fair game, almost. But, and we're letting them bring the topics and bring the talking points and really kind of get their perspective, get their point of view on things. And Dante, for you, it was really about Force Visions and Prophecies. And so I guess, what is it about Force Visions and Prophecies that is as intriguing as it is for you? What is it that really, you like to think about or talk about, or why is it so important?
Yeah, well, and first I recognize this isn't a true story. So it's all fake. People make it up.
Yeah.
But it's fun to talk about it as if it were true.
Yeah.
A lot of times. And so kind of with the name of this episode, with these series of episodes, is from a certain point of view. A lot of stuff you get in Star Wars, like the dialogue and all that stuff when it talks about the Force or anything else, it's always from a certain point of view. And so that's kind of how we learned about the Force. But Force Visions, they're I think the most pure thing that's not from a certain point of view of the characters in Star Wars. What we see is what the Force wants them to see. So in that sense, what's the significance of those Force visions in the ways that the Force communicates with people?
Yeah.
So that's kind of why that interests me.
Yeah, and that's a great answer. And honestly, I mean, and we did a show on Force Visions and Prophecies a while back, but I think in that we kind of, and I apologize if we referenced some of that stuff, but I think it's still fresh in my mind. But these are things that are this happens in our real world, right? We don't have lightsabers and we don't have the Force and all that, but there are prophets out there and there are people that experience visions. And for as long as people have been alive, these things are very intriguing and people are fascinated by them. And then when you add that into a Star Wars universe, Jonesy, I mean, this is like there's so much that we can pull from Force visions, from prophecies. There's things that, we hear them, we read them, and then we, like people like me, hyper focus on them. And like every book I read now, I'm trying to go back to Master and Apprentice and go, and is this the vision she was talking about? Nope. Okay, then I'll go to the next one, right? I keep trying to link those two together.
Right. Ever since the prequels, we've had this concept of the chosen one and, prophecy, foretold. But I'm with Dante. Force visions in particular are a really cool thing because, and I disagree with you already a little bit, Dante, because I think they are interpretive because the person who they're seeing, and if we remember Anakin, right, you're not always given a very clear picture of them, and you have to interpret what they mean. And then, do you do it, or do you do it with your master, or do you do it with your peers, your council? I think, and all of that can kind of shift it. And we've seen where the Jedi Council disagreed in a lot of paths about, what is it they're actually trying to interpret, whether it's a vision or a prophecy. And I always like Yoda's interpretation of some of the stuff with always emotion the future is. And I that's how I've always viewed these Force visions as well, is that there's a certain amount of emotion that go into them, or at the very least, they elicit an emotional response, even from Jedi that we've seen. So I'm really interested to see where we go with all of this and see, and if we have a few examples, we can kind of dig into them a little bit too.
Well, I think, just off of that, I mostly agree with what you're saying. But when I say like not from a certain point of view, it's like when we see the vision of Padme dying, like that's not given to us by Anakin. That's the movie telling us what really happened. Right. And so that's what I meant by not from someone's point of view.
Gotcha. And I think the other thing we see a lot of, Albert, is that these. And we saw this actually in the High Republic in the comics just recently with, I believe her name is Tula in High Republic. She just has this foreboding feeling like something is just wrong. Something is out of place in the darkness. And I know it's not necessarily vision, but it's kind of this Force impression that Force sensitive folks are able to, to feel, and they have to interpret this. And is that a type of vision, or is that just an attunement type of thing?
I think they're probably more sensitive because they're as close to the Force. But I got a question. I'm already going off script, so I already apologize. But I was just thinking about this. Do you guys feel like non-Force sensitive people have Force visions? Do you think the Force speaks to people in that way, even though they may not be, a Jedi or be Force sensitive in some way? Utini, it's your show. So what do you ever thought about that?
I'm trying to think of any examples like in the religious texts of Star Wars. If there's any examples of that, and I can't think of any offhand, but I wouldn't think at all that would preclude that from happening.
Yeah,
like if the Force wants somebody to know something or feel something or be directed towards something, I don't think someone's Force sensitivity would stop that from happening.
Yeah,
I think it would have to be something really overwhelming, though, because the reason why, because even Jedi don't necessarily have Force visions very often. And we've seen historical examples where some don't have any, and then all of a sudden they are just blasted by one out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of a curious one to think about, or whether or not a non-Force sensitive person, like completely zero, would be able to have one. And I think I kind of agree with you, Dante, there. I think if it was something really, really strong, we might view that as intuition, right? In our world, right? Rather than the Force having some mystical power over us. But maybe that's what it is when we have intuition. Maybe we do have the Force and we just don't realize it.
Yeah.
And we haven't elevated to the certain amount of of our species in order to get to attunement. So it's coming any day now.
Yeah. Tuan Zan says I could see Maz having one. I think she was confirmed to be Force sensitive in the Rise of Skywalker novelization. So she definitely is
as strong as Yoda.
Yeah, whatever. Just
the regular folk.
That's not a thing. Go ahead, sir.
Oh yeah, that's gonna say the regular folk. I think definitely can get moved by the Force, plenty of times, all the time. But in terms of actual Force vision, I don't know. It could happen, but I don't know.
It could happen. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, I would agree. I think it could happen. Would they know? Right? They have no way to. If Force vision happens, Jedi's waking up, going, "Oh, I know exactly what this is. It's the Force. I can feel it." Right? But the average Joe Blow, like you, any of us here, if we were in Star Wars world, it would be just a dream. And if it came true, then you're like, whoa, it's a prophecy of some sort. But not everybody is, they may be hanging that or attributing it to some kind of godly presence and not necessarily the Force, although they could be one and the same. But yeah, it's anyway. Sorry, I didn't mean to kind of derail us already, but thought it was an interesting question. So let's get into Force visions and prophecies themselves. And Dante, I want your take on the difference, because I know some people tend to conflate these and they tend to overlap at times. I think we put a stake in the ground and said they're two separate things. But again, from your from your point of view, are they one and the same? Visions versus prophecies?
I mean, there's definitely similarities, but I think they're definitely different. To me, the biggest difference is with Force visions, they're given to you. With prophecies, they're sought out. And so, in terms of how the Force is talking to someone, a Force vision seems more pure. But if someone's like, railing on the Force, like, tell me something, they might get something, but it might not necessarily be exactly what the Force would want to tell them if they were just, on their own natural process of things. And so it's kind of more of the Force user who seeks with prophecies, like they're putting themselves into that vision. That's kind of how I see it.
Right. And we talked about this before, where the ideas of vision quest. And to Dante's point, you are going on a quest of some sort of enlightenment, of some sort of directive, right? You're hoping to achieve something, whether it's, going from one phase of your life to the next, or again, you are looking for some divine type of intervention or some divine type of, enlightenment. And I think then we would more equate that to prophecy than vision. And I get really curious about vision, and I don't want to get too far ahead. Albert, what's your take on this?
Well, yeah, I would say I would agree with everything you guys have just said. I do feel that they are not the same thing. One can sometimes lead to the other, but in my mind, a prophecy is more general than a vision. A vision is very specific, like things are going to happen. A prophecy to me feels like, there's a lot of interpretation there, and it could fit a lot of different people. And one step further than that, and again, I think this is something we've talked about on the show before, but for me, prophecies are things that can repeat themselves. And this is my point of view. I think they can repeat themselves, whereas a vision, again, is a very specific event for very specific people. Prophecies can be cyclical in nature, or as the Force wills, that prophecy may need to be fulfilled once again. And we're talking about Star Wars, right? So we're talking about generations, thousands of years. And so it's probably feasible. Maybe it's a numbers game at that point, that the odds are that some of these prophecies could repeat themselves. And so, but yeah, I would agree certainly with all of those points.
Yeah, and I think sometimes Star Wars characters might confuse the two. At least they won't separate how we're separating it. Like, I think Qui-Gon in Master and Apprentice calls his vision a prophecy, but I wouldn't categorize it as a prophecy.
I wouldn't either. It was a vision. He saw what was going to happen, right at the very end, at the wedding, or the wedding, but the crowning or whatever, right? Okay, so let's talk then. So I guess this is an interesting aspect that I'm glad you included this, because I don't think we really kind of dug into this in the show that we did, but it's this question about how do Force visions come to pass? There's different ways that they come into the minds of these different Jedi or the Sith. Like you said, some of them are forced. Some of them are, sitting down, meditating, trying to see the future. Other times, the Force just speaks to them and naturally comes through in a dream, like with Anakin, or most of these happen, I guess, in dreams outside of them being forced, as far as I can remember right now. But yeah, so I mean, I guess let's get into some examples of where we've seen prophecies enter into Star Wars, and we can pick anything here. We can pick movies, we can pick television shows, the books. But what are some of the ones that stick out for you? One of the bigger prophecies or visions for you, Dante?
So obviously the big ones, the ones in Master and Apprentice, those are the kind of the main prophecies that kind of circle around all of Star Wars all the time. But in terms of how I look at prophecy, as someone like sticking themselves into the Force and try to figure something out, probably Palpatine's a big one too. Because him, like, always trying to find out what the future, trying to foresee it, and trying to figure out how he can manipulate things to come to his advantage by dipping into the future in that way. I think those are the two big ones.
Yeah, and just a follow up on that, for somebody like Palpatine, he was known to really do a lot of that work, trying to see into the future. And do you feel like the Force it's almost like a genie in the bottle kind of thing, right? The genie comes out, you got your wishes, and if you're not real careful about how you ask, you may not exactly get what you want. And it feels at times like the force is in that way. And I think Yoda explains this off as always in motion is the future, right? But I almost feel like there's like this, I don't know, like this edgy side to the force. It's like, you know what? If you're going to force me to give you something, I'm not going to give you the complete picture. And it's going to be up to you to make the right decisions, or this could go really horribly wrong or good in the case of like Anakin, right? I mean, it was almost a self-fulfilled prophecy for Anakin in that, that Padme died, right? He was the result of it. And because he didn't have all the answers, the vision wasn't as clear as he had wanted. But do you think there's an edgy part to the force or some kind of I mean, it is sentient in a to some extent, right? But do you think it's doing that intentionally?
I like to think so. I don't know for sure that I'm going to put a stake in the sand or in the ground saying, yes, that's definitely how it's happening. But to me, it makes sense because the force, even if you give it a consciousness or not, it's got a flow to it and it wants to get in that flow. So if someone's kind of sticking their arm in like what's up there, it's going to push against it a little bit. So it's not just naturally giving it what it wants. It's kind of forcing it to give it what the force user wants. So I think it's going to push back.
Yeah,
right.
I like that.
There's a lot of interpretation with all of this too. It's who had the enlightenment for a prophecy in order to write it down, and what are they light side, or are they dark side, were they somewhere else in that spectrum, or what? And I'm when I hear prophecy, most of them they're always vague enough to where you can make them self-fulfilling. You can create all of the environments and all of the triggers for these things to happen if you just keep doing it enough, right? Eventually you will break down those barriers, and eventually you will do the things, especially if you start to tell people exactly what what is happening, and then you have examples of it, even though you're creating that scenario, or you're at least equating some relevance to it of what you're able to experience and see in something tangible. And it's a very, I always get very edgy about prophecies, and most of my excitement is around the vision side of it. And and again, they do have some sort of relation. They're very different, but they do have a relation. And I've always been curious. We were talking about the desire of the force, or the flow of the force, is when when we think about force visions, usually we think about it from a light side Jedi type of user rather than the dark side user. But dark side users have visions as well, I would presume, right? And I can't pull any off the top of my head. I think we've had more, kind of a suggestion of sorts. I think Maul had a bit of a suggestion of some things too, and that with just those moments. But why would the force give a vision to both sides? Or in general, I mean, if the force, I mean, this maybe goes into the whole balance thing, but why would both sides get a vision? For what purpose does that serve?
Well, I think if you assume the force wants something to happen, it's going to do what it needs to do to try to make that happen. If that's giving it to someone who's a dark sider, to try to influence them to go a certain way, whether it be good or bad, I don't know. It's tough to say. But I think that's the reason why the force might give a dark sider a force vision.
Yeah, and then maybe. Sorry, I was going to say. I think if I'm understanding you right, at least your point of view here on it going back to the balance, right? Okay. If things start to teeter too far to the light side, the force then goes, okay, we're getting too far away from the middle, right? Too neutral, too true balance, and so let me start pushing force visions towards the dark side users, and let me start, causing things and anger and pain so that the dark forces can start to rise. And through that, the nature of balance will be, equated once again, or there would be an equilibrium there, and vice versa, right? I mean, is that what you're saying? Is that those visions are coming in because it's naturally trying to balance itself out in some way?
No, I'm probably changing my mind on the whole thing and listen to y'all about it. Because again, we have to go back and define force vision, right? Force vision is typically you have some glimpse of what is to come, right? Or at least what is possible given where the flow is right now. And so it makes sense that both, any kind of force sensitive person would be able to see those types of things. Now, I think where it's kind of the why would you see some of those things, or why the certain person might be able to see that. And we have a really good example of Elzar Mann right now. When Avar Chris left him and he had this huge vision. He's bleeding out of his nose and mouth and wherever else, basically envisioning what's the darkness to come. And it's always interesting as to why a certain Jedi or why a certain Force user in general would have a certain vision. Like what makes them so special. With Luke on Dagobah, that makes a lot of sense, right? If you continue down this path, this is what you're going to end up as. That one's pretty.
You're referring to the cave.
Right. Yeah. So, but these other ones are like, why you, Albert? If we strike you right now and say, the world is coming to an end in a week and a half, do something about it, and why you?
Yeah, personally, I think this goes back to the consciousness of the Force and the will of the Force versus the will of the Force user. I think the Force is trying to get this person to engage, whether they hear it or not, or follow through with it or not. I think are probably different things, but it feels like it is. They are. If I'm a Jedi and suddenly a Force vision happens, or I have a prophecy, I'm going to feel it's incumbent upon myself to go notify somebody or stop it from happening or ensure that it does happen, right? If it benefits whoever. Same thing with the dark side users. The question of why, though, I don't know. I mean, Dante, I know that was something you wanted to talk about, but how do these? Why does the Force give it to these people? Is it a certain level of criteria? Is it go back to the balance thing? Is it go back to this consciousness of the Force? It doesn't feel like there's any true rhyme or reason, and it feels like anybody could really. Well, I wouldn't say that. There are plenty of Force visions in Star Wars, especially in lore. When you factor in legends, it happens a lot. But in the grand scheme of things, to your point earlier, Jonesy, this isn't something that happens all the time. So there's got to be a mechanism, right? There's got to be a trigger in which the Force says, okay, I'm going to let that person see the Force vision after only one night of sleep. But this sap over here that's been meditating for 10 hours, I'm not going to let them see the feature or whatever. So any thoughts around that, Dante, as far as like why and who's chosen and how the origin of Force visions or prophecies come about?
Yeah, sure. So before I get to that specific point, let me jump back a little bit to what you said, Albert, kind of when we started this. So this is where we disagree about the balance of the Force, because I think definitely balance means equal parts, not equal parts, but light and dark side are both working in unison, doing what they do. But I don't think that the Force would tell a dark sider to pick up the dark side, do more about that because there's too much light. I don't think that's how it works. Because to me, like, I don't want to get too much in the balance, but imbalance happens when someone messes with the Force. And so people on the light side, I mean, how can you mess with the light side unless you stop people from dying? But then by stopping people from dying, you're inserting yourself into the Force, and then that becomes a dark side kind of action. So that's where I kind of disagree with that. And so in that sense, like, why would the Force talk to somebody? So going back to the question, it's trying to get back to that flow. It wants that person to do something. And once that person goes and does something, it'll fix that flow that was created by the imbalance.
Yeah.
And Force visions aren't always about huge imbalances either, but it's just something where the Force wants someone to do something, whether it might, for all I know, like this little action the Force tries to get this person to do might fix big consequences later. That could be something.
Right.
But to me, Force visions are generally because it's wanting the Force user or the person to go towards something and to try to, fix something that might go wrong.
Yeah, no, I like that. And we certainly see that. I mean, that's usually how it gets played out, with varying degrees of success, right? Sometimes they're able to stop it from happening. Sometimes they're not. That's a whole nother aspect of the Force that it's probably beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But I think we've touched on another bullet here, which was the Force visions and how they're interpreted. It feels like and maybe I just touched on it, but Dante, it feels like we do get varying degrees of action based on the Force vision, and kind of what you said earlier. It really depends on how significant and how much weight is behind the Force vision, right? If it's something minor, somebody probably just lets it happen. There's not a lot of interference, so there's not a lot of interaction with it. But if it's something detrimental, like in the case that we talked about with Master and Apprentice, or with Anakin, there was a lot of repercussions that came about as a result of him trying to tamper with it. But beyond that, I mean, how I guess what are there any other variations in terms of how they're interpreted from our Jedi or Force users when they come in?
Well, what do you mean specifically by how they're interpreted?
So, like, I guess for Force users,
Okay, sorry, I get it now.
yeah.
So I think, to me, like the way Force vision should be interpreted, it's all, and I can't think of any examples of Force visions where this is not the case. I think every single one is trying to push the Force user towards something. That doesn't mean that's how they interpret it. Like Yoda's all the time saying, just don't go. Just don't worry about it. Let it go. It'll pass.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's wrong every time when he does it. But every single Force vision, I think it's pushing someone towards something.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a great example where Kylo Ren and Rey, right? The whole Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, but they're both seeing the same vision, supposedly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I reach out my hand, you'll take it next time, and when the time comes, you'll turn. But clearly, that's telling them what's probably going to happen, and the fight in the throne room with Snoke. But again, it's the same thing, but it's that variation of just how they're interpreting it. And I think some of it is just how they want to interpret it,
Mm-hmm.
right? They want something so bad. And when they see it, it empowers you that, yeah, it's either supporting me of I am going the right way, or it's trying to say, no, there is a slightly different path. And the Kylo / Ben and Rey dynamic is, I think, a really good example of how you can have probably the exact same vision, especially if they were a dyad, and still not be able to come to the same conclusion, even though you're both pretty much still on the same path the entire time.
Yeah. So my question with that is, do you think that was a natural Force vision, or was it given to them by people? Was it a Sidious-induced vision?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I have a feeling it's probably more, well, given the nature that, she was going to turn and that's what Kylo Ren interpreted, I'm going to go more with the Force side rather than Snoke or Palpatine in that case, because I don't, and again, them joining forces and things like that, you could say that there's a correlation because Rey did share that, I forgot who she shared it with Fenn maybe, that she would be on the throne, and I don't remember if she said that if Kylo was by her side or not.
I think she was by Kylo's side, if I remember correctly.
I think that sounds right too. Yeah. So again, some of this is also is that a warning instead of an actual, future or possible future? And again, that's the difficult part with visions. Visions aren't necessarily 100% true. And we've seen Qui-Gon was another good example of Master and Apprentice. The way he interpreted the Force vision ended up not being everything kind of went, but the whole perspective was wrong. And he looked at it from the wrong angle or from a different angle and didn't see the true nature of what the vision would be.
Yeah. And I think because in preparation for this, I re-listened to Master and Apprentice because it talks about that stuff a lot. It's a great book. Read it if you have a chance.
Yeah.
But so he misinterpreted it. Definitely, he says I misinterpreted it a few times.
Right.
But what he did was he had the vision and he would not deviate from it. He's like, okay, I'm focusing on this vision. What can I do with this vision? Right. He looked at it wrong, but by focusing on the vision, the good thing came. The reason the Force gave him the vision came about, and they were saved.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great example, and I agree with you there. The idea that you're still playing into whatever's going on, and I think the thing about Qui-Gon that other Jedi and other Sith don't necessarily do is they don't give themselves over to the will of the Force or allow themselves to remain open. They get very narrow-minded that they have to do something. I have to do this. And I think that's where we start to see the errors in their way sometimes. If they would allow themselves to just be open to it and let things play and, play their part and be who you are, a lot of these things would be, probably work their way out if we were able to open ourselves up more to it.
Yeah, and I would say that's not a trait exclusive to either the Jedi or Sith, right? I mean, I think there's examples of both that as they get a vision, they will take whatever, if it's a vision that works in their favor, they will try to, set other things in motion or just ensure that happens, right? It becomes a self-fulfilled prophecy, self-fulfilled vision. They'll do whatever they can to make sure it happens. If it doesn't, if it's not going to go the way they want, they will do whatever they can to stop it from happening. And for me, it feels like they are trying to mess with the will of the Force, right? They're trying to go against the grain and control the Force in some way. Whereas, like you said, somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn, who's so in tune with the Force, who's so willing to give himself up to just the will of the Force, and as the Force wills it, right? And you think of like Chirrut and some of those guys, right? They're willing to give themselves up. That it feels like that is actually what allows them to have the outcome they want, good or bad, right? It feels like that's probably the more balanced approach, if you will, than going in and trying to control the Force, because I don't think you really can, and I think that's where the Force pushes back, to some degree. There's go ahead. No,
real question for you. So when Luke is reading Ben Solo, right, in the flashback, and he's trying to read his future, or he's trying to read his aura, or whatever it is he trying to force himself into a Force vision, or is he really just? I mean, what's the difference between a Force vision and trying to look into the future? Then,
do you mean on like the Rashomon scenes?
Yeah,
is that what you're talking about?
Well, the one where he's, they have the different interpretations of the story about why Ben went dark.
Yeah, it's that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't remember any specific talks about Force vision. I don't think necessarily he was going in there to try to get a vision of what Ben's going, because he talks about how he senses Ben's going to the dark, or he senses the darkness inside Ben, I think more specifically.
Right.
So he's going in there. I mean, I'm not sure what would push someone to go in there. Like, I sense him being dark, so let's go in there, just look over him and be creepy for a little bit.
Right.
And then he's like, oh, I better kill him. Like, I mean, that's a weird sequence of events, how someone would put themselves in that situation. Maybe he had a Force vision before that of Ben going dark. I mean, it would make sense if he saw something like that, and okay, it pushed even more. Like, I sense the darkness, but I saw this thing is pushing me even more so towards, reticence towards training this person, or even letting him stay alive.
I mean, I walked away from that. Well, I've walked away from that scene since the movie, since the novel, a couple different ways. And I don't know that I really have I don't know that I have any one set opinion of this is how it happened, because it is a Rashomon scene, and because it is something that, Luke had a moment of weakness, and we know that he wasn't telling the truth. Like, I don't really even 100% believe the full story at the very end of it. Like, part of me feels like at some point he just went in there, he had a vision, like you said, prior to, and saw Kylo Ren there, saw the darkness in him, and thought, okay, I'm going to end it right here, right now. Another part of me feels like he went in there, and then I think it was in the second interpretation, he said he saw what was going to happen, right? He saw the vision. He had a vision of the chapel collapsing and all this stuff, and linked it to Kylo Ren. But then part of me feels like, okay, that was just him rationalizing, doing something that he knew in his heart he really couldn't do. And so he excused it off as, okay, the Force spoke to me and I had no choice. I was going to do it. But then I got the better, I got a hold and got a grip on myself and stopped myself from doing it, and decided to, go exile myself. So I don't, and it's a great question. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I think if the second part is true, then yeah, I think he did have a vision, albeit maybe a smaller, very quick vision of what happened. Although, time's not absolute. It probably was a bunch of flashes of memory of scenes and all that stuff, kind of like what Rey had with her Force vision. But so I don't know. I never walked away from that scene really feeling like there was a definitive answer as to whether or not he actually saw those events, and to what extent, if he did, to what extent the vision was clear for him. But that's my point of view.
Yeah, so you're right. So there was the vision that he talked about, but I totally agree. Like, he's telling us that he saw a vision, but we don't know like how accurate that is, how complete it is, or maybe he's putting too much of his own interpretation in what he saw. So it's tough to trust that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. There's some psychology behind this that says you can only see in others what you see and understand about yourself. And so is he projecting his darkness onto Ben in some way? Kind of getting straight off a little bit here, but it's an interesting kind of conversation.
We're getting into the psychology of that scene, the psychology of Luke Skywalker. Okay, so let's end with this last piece here, and I guess the inevitability of Force visions, right? We know that some interpretations are wrong. We know that some events are certainly happen, but how set in stone do you think these things really are? Right? Do you, like we said, almost every time, and we can we can call out examples of where it came true and when it didn't. But in the one that really comes to mind for me is Anakin Skywalker. the vision that he had that Padme was going to die. It, you could argue that was always going to happen because it was just the will of the Force, or because it was the will of Anakin Skywalker through his actions. But do you feel like these things really truly are set in stone, or do you think the Force allows somebody to control and change and manipulate and steer the course of how things could turn out?
I mean, in a granular level, it's not set in stone, because if you just look at that Force vision, she yells, "Anakin, come back." I forget exactly what it was, but she yells something. But what she yells does not happen in the real events. Mm-hmm. So in terms of like granular, like it's not exactly the same. But whether or not it's going to happen, I don't think so. Because the way I interpret, especially because I talked about it before, like I think all these Force visions are pushing people towards something. And most of the time they interpret them wrong. But with this, like, it's trying to make him focus on Padme. Same thing with the visions about his mother. It's focused on the mother, but he waits too long every time. And then specifically with Padme, he didn't focus on Padme. He focused on himself. It's like, what can I do? What can make myself stronger? Okay, I got to hurry up and finish this war so I can focus on Padme. But no, you stop and you focus on Padme.
Yeah,
I think if he would have stopped and focused on Padme, then things would have gone differently. She probably wouldn't have been on the Polis Massa asteroid and died in that medical facility. I mean, that's just the way I see it. I'm not a determinist. I think things can happen how they happen. They might most likely going to happen a certain way, but things can change. Free will I think it exists in Star Wars just as much in real life, in my opinion. So I don't think she had to die. I don't think she would have died had he focused on Padme.
No, that's a great point. I mean, he was young, selfish, and was focused on himself. But Jonesy, you were going to say something there. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's why else would they give you a vision if it wasn't like a choose your own adventure book? Mm-hmm. I mean, the issue is you don't know what page you're on, so you don't know when you got to turn the page to do something different. But it's at least saying, look, here's something that may happen, and it might be very likely at this point. But I'm going to tell you because you have some sort of influence over this event, even if indirectly. It might be you directly, or it might be indirectly. It's where you're influencing someone else, but you have something you can do about it. Otherwise, this is the path that it's going to go, and go and do it. And so I think it is a bit of a. I mean, there's a will. This is where you start to get an argument of the will of the Force, right? And whether or not it's completely certain. But why would it give you these four? I mean, that would be the difference between vision and prophecy. Otherwise, everything would be a prophecy because it's telling you exactly what's going to happen without fail. It may not be like Dante said, it might not be to every little detail, but the broader stream of that, and really not all that broad, still fairly narrow, those events would take place, and that would lean more towards a prophecy than necessarily a vision, right? So I that's why I like visions. You have a lot more flexibility, and I think you do have a lot more control. And I think the will of the Force, we could always say there is a will of the Force, but you can always get to certain paths in different ways. And I agree with Dante. We have this more, cosmic living force type of circle going, life and death and everything. As long as it's rotating, as long as it's going there, even if you get to periods of length on one side or the other, it will get back in motion or back on track in some way. But it doesn't mean that there's not a lot of wiggle room in the path and on that way. And, life moves on. The Force doesn't have an ultimate destination either. At least it doesn't seem, right. I mean, this is where it's like, okay, well, what's this? It goes into one of those things. Well, what's the point? What's my purpose? What's all this mean? And we're not going to answer those questions. And the Force doesn't care enough to answer those questions either. It's like, no, we're just going to be cool and we're going to go. All right.
Thanks for your, what's his name? No, I won't bring it up.
Matthew McConaughey.
Well, no, I was thinking about Into the Dark with I'm forgetting his name now. It's not Gianossi, but Genasi. Forget it. It doesn't matter. He's one of the characters that was modeled after Matthew McConaughey in the High Republic novel. Okay, so maybe let's just. All right, so maybe final thoughts here. For me, and Dante, we'll give you the last word. I'll go to Jonesy after this. But for me, Force visions are. I mean, they're pretty important. They're a part of Star Wars as much as lightsabers, as much as TIE fighters and the Force. I love the fact that we're in the High Republic, and I love the fact that we've already gotten our first Force vision, and boy, was it a doozy at the very end of Into the Light of the Jedi. Sorry, that's great stuff. for Star Wars, you know, Force visions and prophecies are always going to be there, and I love that. I hope we get to see more of that in the television stuff, right? And all the stuff that's coming out in Disney Plus. It seems to be straying away from Jedi, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I wonder if we are going to get anything like that, if they're going to be as prevalent and as dominant. But it feels like it is a staple. It feels like the High Republic at least is picking that up, and I'm really excited to see what other kind of Force visions. And I really hope some of the stuff that was in Master and Apprentice and some of those prophecies and all, I don't even know how many were there, like 6, 7, 8 of them that they dropped on us, the egg and, I can't remember all of them now at this point, but I hope some of those do play out either in the High Republic or maybe in some of the future Star Wars stuff that we see on Disney Plus. But Joni, I guess final words from you on Force Visions and Prophecies.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is one of those subjects that it would be great if they really just wrote about it. And if we discovered some old journals from maybe someone who has experienced life on both the dark side and the light side that just has some other interpretive, perspective on it. But I really like this because it's just, you can make these things whatever you want them to be if you want it bad enough. And I like that possibility is always there. And I've always been really against prophecies in general. I don't believe in prophecy, and I don't understand how anybody thinks they could have it. No, you're out, right? I don't want to subscribe to that type of thing. It's just my way of living. But visions of how we can be better, or visions how we can make a difference, I think those are really attractive things. Those are really important concepts. I think those are really things you take note of. If you already know what the destination, then it's kind of what's the point? But I like knowing that, hey, there are things that are going to happen. You have something you can do about it. Be true to yourself and forge your own path and go from here and do what you can, and the Force will take care of the rest.
Yeah. Dante, final words from you on Force Visions and Prophecy.
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing with Force visions, I think it's mostly more about like the broader balance of the Force and that kind of stuff. And I think definitely we'll see more about it. You can't take the Force out of Star Wars, and if you have the Force in Star Wars, the Force has got to communicate with people. It gets uninteresting if all it is people blocking stuff with lightsabers, using the Force that way. So if they cut out Force visions, I think that'll be sad. But the more we get Force visions, the more examples we get, the more details we can get about and kind of how we can judge how to interpret it. But I just like to think that all these Force visions, like they're trying to tell people about something they should focus on. Like even the dark side Force visions, if you look at Luke in the cave or Rey in the cave, both those caves, both of them are like, okay, Yoda says, don't bring that lightsaber in there with you. Luke brings it in him. He slashes Vader and sees himself in Vader. Like, what would have happened if he wouldn't have brought that the lightsaber in with him? Would he have seen Palpatine? I don't know. And then also, like, I had a few examples here, like Ezra, like his vision, like he totally misinterpreted it. But what he did was he saw the vision and went towards it. And by going towards it, like the stuff that the Force would want to happen happened. So I think in all these Force visions, it really shows that the Force wants something from people and wants people to do things. And I think it's really interesting to look at it through that lens of like, what is the Force trying to get these people to do?
Yeah. And I think we all are in agreement there. And whether or not they follow through with it it gives us all the drama that we love in Star Wars, right? Whether it's successful or not. So. All right. Well, we're gonna wrap the show up on that note. Jonesy, thanks for being here. You didn't have a choice. Dante, thanks for coming on to the show. Again, it was great to see you after seeing you 2 years ago in Chicago. We always appreciate your feedback, your thoughts, your comments. I know you're a big Discord person, and so keep all that up. And we couldn't honestly do these shows without you, because half the time you're fact checking us or telling us who we can't remember the name of when we're live and recording. So thank you for that as well, sir.
Oh yeah, it's a blast being on here. I really appreciate it. I've tried to do Legos when I'm listening from now on. Just kind of it keeps me from typing as fast. Like, okay, a lot of times like I'll type something, you guys get to it. I'm like, oh, I should have just waited. You'll get to it eventually anyway.
Yep.
So try not to jump the gun so much because I mean you guys do great. So
thank you, and thanks to everybody. Yeah, thanks, man. Really do appreciate that. Thanks to everybody that joined us on the live show tonight. And just keep in mind, we've got more of these shows coming here down the pipe. We've got another one scheduled in a couple weeks, I think, and then we've got. I don't know. We're going to keep doing this until we run out of people. So, stay tuned for more bonus episodes, and then we'll be back. I think we're going to be back on Tuesday of next week because this coming Sunday is Easter holiday, so we won't be back for our normally scheduled program on Sunday. It'll be that following Tuesday. So, with that, thanks everybody once again, and we'll see you guys on the next show.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. You can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.